Hey guys, welcome into another episode of From the Wing. I'm Christian Clark, the Pelicans beat writer for NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. We have a jam-packed show for you today. We're going to talk about Airline Drive versus the LSED. I was at this LSED meeting yesterday, broke some news on the Pelican side. Extremely newsworthy event. I had my popcorn out. A lot happened. We're really excited to talk about some of the fireworks there. We're going to talk about my big concern with a potential Brandon Ingram trade, but I feel like we have to address some news that just came out within the last hour at the top of the show. Trajan Langdon, who's been the GM of the New Orleans Pelicans for the last 5 years, it looks like he's going to leave the team to run the Detroit Pistons as their president of basketball operations. Trajan was in the mix for this job. It sounded like him and Dennis Lindsey and Dallas were two of the finalists. Trajan finally got a top job. He was in the mix for Charlotte, DC. I think he badly wanted to run his own team, and now he's going to get a chance to do just that and try to build a winner out of what was the NBA's worst team last year, the 14-win Detroit Pistons.
I think he's been in talks for a while now with like jobs that have come up. Like his name's been in the cycle for a while now, so we should expect this as something that was going to come. I had my doubts about Detroit only because, like, I guess it's my own like personal fan opinion of him is very high. So I'm just like, yeah, he can like pick his spot. Like he can wait and get like a great job. Detroit, like as far as jobs that come available, Detroit, there could be worse. Detroit has assets you can move. The big scary thing in Detroit, the one big scary thing is that Monty doesn't really like your young pieces and he can't leave. So you have to work around that at least for this year, maybe two, to get the buyout down.
Well, it's interesting you say that because the reporting out of Detroit, like James Edwards, who's really plugged in there, it makes it seem like Trajan is going to have final say over any front office personnel and any coaching personnel. Like the way the reporting came out right after the hire was, hey, if he wants to make a move at coach, he can make a move at coach. And Tom Gores, who's the owner there, will just eat this. Monty Williams signed a 6-year deal worth like $75 million last summer. That's going to be really interesting to see. Does Trajan Langdon go in there and say, yeah, Troy Weaver, I can work with him. He can work under me. I can work with Monty Williams. I mean, those are two of the big questions.
I would like if it were me. I'll just do if it were me. I wouldn't say if I bet because I don't know what Trajan thinks. I would fire Troy Weaver. Get your own person in there because the moves have not made sense. Like especially the bigs around Cade, not forcibly playing Ivy next to Cade to at least find out what you have. The proliferation of Isaiah Stewart.
Yeah, it's been horrible. I mean, Troy Weaver has done an abominable job.
He's got to go. And you just also need a clean slate. Like you're coming in there to do your own thing. Bring in your guys, just not Bryson Graham because he's going to get promoted here. But Monty, like I think you could do a 1 year with Monty. You could tell Gores, hey, I'm going to keep Monty around for a year. We'll do an evaluation year, but I'm going to take away his toys. Isaiah Stewart's got to go. Defensive guys and vets have to go because Monty leans on them in ways that are not logical. So I'm going to make him use my guys and see what we have. And if he can't do it, then he needs to leave. And then you're like, it's a nice happy medium between Gores having to pay a gigantic buyout versus like trimming a year off and compromising a little bit. And I think that's still a smooth path forward because like it's a little late in the game to start interviewing coaches now, being the third, fourth team into the game here. So keep Monty, but take away the toys a little bit, make him use your guys. Kind of in a similar way, I hope happens in New Orleans this year.
You know what one of my predictions is? One of my predictions is that Trajan Langdon, who was, like a marksman at Duke, a guy really known for his outside shot. One of my predictions is he'll value outside shooting a little more than Troy Weaver did. Troy Weaver looked at the NBA and said, outside shooting, 3-point shooting, it's not that important. So, yeah, I think that Trajan Langdon will think that 3-point shooting is more important than Troy Weaver did. So just a little insight on Trajan Langdon and like what people thought of him in New Orleans. I would describe him as a guy with just good relationships at every level of the organization. Like he was a guy who people would just go out of your way to tell you, like, ownership really likes Trajan Langdon. Trajan interviewed for the Pelicans' top job in 2019, did not get it. David Griffin got it, but ownership and David Griffin thought enough of him to come in here and make him the number two. And I'm not going to throw around numbers, but like very, very, very well compensated for a number two. It was a really nice job. I'm sure the pitch was come here, be the number two, and like prepare yourself to be a number one somewhere because that's what Trajan wanted to do. And like a guy people think is sharp and like people are happy for that they got this job. I also think kind of an unknowable guy. Like Trajan is not out there talking. Real G's move in silence like lasagna. Yeah. So like I Trajan's a nice guy. I like him. People like him. I just have no idea how this will go. And I don't mean it in a bad or a good way. I don't really have any feel,
That's a fantastic place to start for a guy who needs to be able to make moves to shape a team. Like, and it's diametrically opposed to the other guy we talked to here in terms of how they operate. So it's, I think that's a good foundation. Like, rave positive reviews. Nobody really talking trash about him. What we do know about things he's had a part in have gone very, very well. Everyone has a high opinion of him, and he's quiet. Those sound like things that are incredible building blocks. Oh, and prior success at another franchise where he scraped together like a team full of role players that wildly overachieved. And now like the parts have not been what they, other than Jared Allen, the pieces parts have not been what they were after they left Brooklyn. So yeah, it sounds like an awesome start of a resume. I think what we do know bodes well for success. We're happy for him too. It's scary. We don't know. I can't tell you where his responsibilities start and stop and where Bryson's start and stop. And it's scary because you feel like you're losing a good dude. But we know Bryson's had his hands in a lot of stuff recently, especially like specific player evaluations that have really, really hit home.
Yeah, like the one that people talk about a lot is Bryson Graham had a lot of influence taking Trey Murphy 17th overall in 2021. I mean, one of the biggest wins for this franchise in the last 5 years, like finding, a player in the middle of the first round.
Yeah, and we're one of those teams that like needs those wins and needs to win on the fringes because of the lack of like the free agency churn that we'll be able to have. So you just hope that maintains, and like that's the thing that you have like a little bit of fear for. But we're all happy for Trajan.
One of the specific questions I have is the Pelicans made a lot of changes to their medical staff last summer, and we've talked the Aaron Nelson stuff to death. But one of the things they did was, David Griffin was kind of the point person for the front office in the first 4 years, and he basically ceded those responsibilities to Trajan Langdon. That was something that Trajan did this past year. He was the, top executive, was the point person with the medical staff, and I think this past year went pretty well for the most part. And with this stuff, it's always hard to know how much of it was luck. Like, let's just be real. Like, a lot of this stuff is randomness, but it seemed like the Pelicans did a pretty good job of just like managing their players and their players being consistently available. So that's something I'm just looking out for going forward. Who will be the front office person who kind of, works with like Amy Atmore as the director of rehab and Daniel Bove, who's, like a sports and performance guy, and Tom Maystad, the head athletic trainer, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Like I think we've joked about this a ton, like that if Nelson were to leave and like, this just by happenstance, this could go better because you couldn't have much worse luck than they've had previous to now. And we got a good season. So we don't really know where to draw the lines on credit. So we'll just say everyone gets credit, and we're just going to have to hope it maintains next year. This is like, it's a little bit of the mystery of these teams is where does all the incremental stuff start and stop? But you know what? Great place to start is players not hating the person in charge. And they don't hate the people right now. So as good a place to start as any.
All right, let's pivot and talk about a massive story that broke on Wednesday. This is really complicated. I'm gonna do my best to explain this all. I was at the LSED meeting. the LSED is the Louisiana Stadium and Exposition District. Like they kind of negotiate on the state's, like they help run and maintain like the Superdome, the Smoothie King Center, help kind of put on events. They work with the Saints to determine like the lease terms, the Pelicans to determine the lease terms, that kind of thing. They're kind of partners with Airline Drive, Gail Benson and the people who work for her on these professional sports teams that we have here and the events that happen in these buildings. So I was at this LSED meeting. It's a monthly meeting on Wednesday because I thought there might be some Pelicans news to come out of it. I broke the news last year that the Pelicans extended their lease at Smoothie King Center through 2029. And basically, Pelicans ownership has said, look, we're going to commission a study and just like evaluate the infrastructure of Smoothie King Center. That process started in March. It's been going on the past few weeks. And I was just wondering, is there going to be an update? Are they going to progress from, hey, we did the study to actually formulating a plan of like, here are actionable steps we can take to potentially try to improve this building? Well, the huge piece of news from a Pelicans perspective is that this process has been halted. Why has this process been halted? Because the Saints of the Pelicans, one and the same, have stopped paying their invoices on the Superdome renovation. Gail Benson's Saints have not paid their invoices on the Superdome renovation since December, almost half a year. Their outstanding amount was $11.5 million. And LSED officials said at this meeting, we are not going to continue forward on this evaluation of Smoothie King Center and the formulation of this master plan of what the heck to do to improve this building until this money gets paid.
Whoa. All right. So this is a lot. And it is, it's probably, this is like our nerdy territory that this podcast like loves to delve into. And I think does a good job of. I deal with cash transactions in large sums with other entities, and we maintain tax IDs and ETF transfer forms and all of these things. This is wild. This is a really, really wild story, and I think people like your casual fan probably ho-hums this a little bit because they're like, oh, whatever. So they didn't pay. We have a natural, like as Louisianians, we have a natural distaste for city and state government because we have not benefited from most of their existence, most of our lives. Like we're pretty negative about government in this state. And I get it. I do. However, this board is appointed to do only this, and this doesn't happen. And the response from the team. So as Christian just said, the LSED had an agenda item on the Pelicans, and like there's nothing to it. There's nothing to the arena because we had to stop here because they just stopped paying their bills. And it's clearly like a hostile negotiating tactic. It's just wild to think that you're doing this out in the public and you're kind of using your fan buy-in for your franchise to paper over the fact that you haven't paid close to $12 million in back due bills. It's just crazy. So this is a non-traditional setup. So look, compared to other markets, there are not a lot of places that have like a city board extending down for the state that are administrators of the giant buildings that the sports teams operate out of. This is this is a fairly unique thing. But what's also unique is the idea that we're treating, Gail Benson's administration is treating them as the opponent and using something like their like day-to-day billing for a contract they've agreed to and invoices they've agreed to pay as a way to force them to come to terms on the ongoing negotiation of re-signing their lease. So yeah, this is just really dirty, man. And it's weird. The weirdest thing is like this administration's very sensitive about being perceived as cheap. They don't like the tax conversation. They really hate cafeteria conversation. And yet we're going to do this out in public sphere for you to see. And we'll just say, here's a press release. We need certain documentation.
Yeah, I mean, like, I didn't look at this and say the Saints are being cheap, I don't think. I mean, this is not what this is. I mean, like, Gil Benson is not Steve Ballmer with $60 billion of Microsoft stock to liquidate anytime she wants, but also $11.5 million, like, with the money they're dealing with, probably not that much, right? Like, I don't look at this and say, like, they're being cheap or she doesn't have the money.
Oh, it's not have.
Yeah.
It's just the willingness to participate in this when you're that sensitive about the other things.
Yeah. I think that, not paying their tab on the renovation, the Saints, that was a chess move. And I think what the LSED did on Wednesday was also a chess move. And it was really interesting to see the kind of dueling press releases that the Saints and then the LSED released after this meeting. The Saints said, basically, we stopped paying and we were seeking certain documentation from the LSED. It was very vague. And the LSED on Wednesday night said certain documentation. Like, they basically were like, what documentation are you referring to? And their statement said, we have turned over construction invoices, pay requests, change orders, and other project-related expenses. So the LSED is basically saying, like, we've given you all the documentation for the work that is being done on the Superdome. My read on this situation is, I think this all has to do with the Saints and the long-term lease that they could potentially sign with the state at the Superdome. The Saints last year extended their lease to the Superdome through 2030, so they've got a little bit of time. But I think the Saints and the state are working through like a longer-term lease at the Superdome. And my interpretation of this situation is this is kind of ways the two sides go to war over terms on that long-term lease.
It's exactly what it is. And it's like, if you've negotiated anything, and look, I don't expect people to have a ton of experience in negotiations, but anyone who does, it's just wild that these are the tactics. And maybe this is normal now in 2024. I tend to work, my day job is around a lot of government funding. So we don't really have a lot of like underhanded tactics because you have to be very transparent about what your desires are. And we're basically all trying to do right every day. However, I'm very familiar with what it takes to do massive cash transfer on contracts and like the documentation, the certain documentation that needs to be present to pay bills. So when they say this, like, I'm laughing right out the gate because what they're implying is that like, at like an electronic transfer form change or their bank account change or their tax ID change. And let me tell you, that is flatly not happening. So then, okay, what did they do? Not send you an invoice? Of course they did. So like, what is the certain documentation? And it's this. It's a piece of paper that they wrote on and said, this is the certain documentation. It's probably something either hyper frivolous that they're going to make up, or it's something that they can't possibly deliver because it's not real or tangible yet. And they can argue that they're missing something. But in reality, this is holding out cash that is operational cash for the LSED. Part of the LSED's conversation around this was that their future tab beyond the 11.5 million is not payable by LSED. Like, they don't have the funds to pay the Saints full tab, so they can't do this forever. That kind of paints the picture. Like, the Saints are like, yeah, I'm going to tighten the purse strings right now, and you're going to give me a better rate on my extension. Like,
yeah, I mean, I read that Saints statement, and when I read that line, certain documentation, I was like, this doesn't really pass the smell test. I did not think it was like the cleanest, best PR work there. I mean, I just think like a broad observation I have of the Saints and the Pelicans is when you ask some hard questions, about ownership and like performance, sometimes it doesn't seem like they always react in the best way. And this was something I experienced with the TV deal, like just a very harsh reaction to some of the stuff I was writing, where I was basically just like, hey, hey, look, Dennis Lauscha said on the record, we're going to try to, accessibility is our number one priority, and then basically re-upping with Bally. Like they did not react very well when I said this seems kind of hypocritical to me. They reacted very angrily. And, I couldn't help but think of that whenever all of this played out Wednesday. And I read that PR statement and kind of the stuff that was said afterwards.
Look, I reacted the same way. I had a lot of friends not react that way. Like instinctively, I think there's for some fans, what's at play here is like, we like the Saints and Pelicans a lot. We obviously follow them very closely. So if you tell us that city or state did not submit documents, we grew up under Edwin Edwards and Kathleen Blanco and Bobby Jindal, like all these people are walking comedies. So would it be hard to believe that a government entity didn't do something right? No. And that's why that was the assertion, because it's easy to believe. But certain documentation, that's the best we could do. Like, and like fans with critical thinking hats, like we need a little bit better wording than that. Like just this blase certain documentation, that's just asking a lot for me. Because I understand a little bit about the framework of how transactions like this happen. And it just, you have a standing relationship with them. You've paid them hundreds of times. You didn't all of a sudden not be able to pay them. And we know you have the money. That's a joke too. And then in your statement, you say, we'll be happy to pay. So you're just assuming that they didn't give you the right paperwork to pay for stuff. And that's ludicrous because there's no benefit to them doing that. There's no win for the LSED to not send you invoices and things you need.
Yeah. And the work is being done. And from what I can understand, the renovation of the Superdome is expected to be complete in a few months here. One thing the LCD said was like, hey, look, I mean, it might have to be interrupted if we don't get the money from the Saints that we need. I think there's $58 million. That's what it's going to cost to finish up this project. I believe that the Saints are on the hook for $41 million. So like the LCD is saying we need this funding to come in from the Saints to complete the project, but the project is close to completion. From everything I could tell, and the work is being done. I mean, maybe this isn't a perfect metaphor, but if you pay a contractor to work on your home and you agree on X price and they're doing the work and it looks like the work is going to be done on time, even if like other stuff happens, to me, it feels like you have to keep making those payments. You can't just say we're not making those payments.
I can actually color this. My father was a contractor. My dad was an architect and a contractor. So what is likely at play here is payments in phases. So you very likely approved certain sets of phased payments, which is probably why the invoices are only up to some total to this point. But there's always a completion phase. It's usually like even distribution. So say it was 50 million, it's probably like 12 and change each stage. And as you complete a stage, you get released the next payment. Super, super common practice. It's what my dad dealt with his entire career. But I can tell you, a lot of people try to drum up problems for the final phase because nobody wants to pay full ticket. Nobody. They want to argue about the tile that was used in the bathroom or where the bathroom was located. It's 2 feet over from where we wanted. That part's like, that rings a little true.
And people do that, but I don't think that's what's happening here. I mean,
no, they're not even doing that. They're just saying, I'm going to halt payment now because like, I want you to just build my house and I just don't want to pay you until you do this other thing for me. That's not even related to this.
Yes. I feel like that's a pretty accurate read on the situation that is happening right now. Now, as this relates to the Pelicans, I honestly don't think this is that big of a deal for the Pelicans. The Pelicans lease at Smoothie King Center runs through June 2029. There is plenty of time for the Pelicans, the state to figure out what to do with Smoothie King Center. I mean, just, I think, a couple years ago it was really discussed like, oh, could the Pelicans get a new arena? I mean, no one has told me outright, but my feel on it is like, there's not a new arena happening. Like I personally have just mentally accepted this is going to be a renovation of the building at some point. And my question is this going to be a nice renovation? And there are plenty of examples throughout the NBA of buildings that are 20 plus years old getting renovated and looking really nice. Or is this going to be, we are slapping lipstick on the pig that is the SKC? That is the question that I have.
Yeah, I think I've been there for a while. Like realistically, one of the challenges you have with this city is that there's just not free space. There is not this open, available, like there's not this outlet right outside the city. No one's going to build an arena in New Orleans East, and that's where the land is. So if you wanted to build something and you want it wide open, there's plenty of land out there if you want it, but that's not where they want it. The
Yeah, I mean,
location
they
right now
talked
is
about
like
like by the by Mardi Gras World or whatever,
yeah,
but like
yeah,
I think it's like I think it's a money thing, right? I mean, like a
yeah,
new arena is what, $1 billion? Like, are they
maybe
coming up with
two.
$1 billion between Pelicans and Saints ownership and the state for a new NBA arena? I
Yeah.
mean, I'm just being realistic. Probably not, right?
No, and like that's one of the things that comes with like the state having a board that runs the arenas is like these are tax funded, like these, especially these two things. Like we've talked about this before, but the arena was designed on spec to lure a team to the city. It was built ahead of time for whatever it may get, and it got an ice hockey team, and then it became a basketball arena, but it was not designed as one. And I think that's the fatal flaw right now. Like that's the thing we're trying to overcome. So I would hope, like I'm resigned to the fact that it's a renovation. It clearly needs to be. That is what the public, especially now with inflation, the public tax tolerance for being a part of an arena. A reno is all anybody's going to be able to stomach if there's going to be any tax dollars involved. Unless, we get into debates in this city about whether the tax dollars come from tourists or not, but that's neither here nor there. This has to be because of how the arena was originally designed. It has to be like a 1 year move out to the Superdome, like get out of there, do a full gargantuan gut job, reestablish the structural footprint in the center of the arena, and really, really better design the entire space. It's got to be the ones you're referencing, like Atlanta. It's got to be one of those where you do the full comprehensive. And if it bleeds into more than a year, so be it. You got to get it right if you're going to do it. And you got to do it once and be right.
Yeah, two of the major problems that people talk about with Smoothie King Center, the lack of lower bowl seats. I think you'd really like to make it a bigger lower bowl if you can. And it's just a small footprint. I mean, I think it's like 16,500 square feet, something like that. I mean, most modern day NBA arenas, 18,000 square feet or more. This limits the back of house space. I mean, when you're like in the bowels of Smoothie King Center, you can really feel that. Like you're walking right by all the players after the game just ends. I mean, it's a little like cramped as far as NBA arenas go. So like those are I think two of the major areas to address. But yeah, that's kind of where things stand. I mean, like I don't think it's like I don't look at what happened Wednesday as, oh my gosh, I'm really worried about like the Pelicans in their future now or anything like that. I just think it's funny that not funny. I mean, it was noteworthy that, tensions kind of flared between Pelicans and Saints and the LSED. They flare a little bit.
Yeah, for me, it's entirely it's comparing the past reactions to the perception of unwillingness to spend on things. It's just an interesting thing when you've been around these teams for years and you've heard and seen where the sensitivities are, that they would also like lapse on a bill since December to the tune of $11+ million. Like it's a funny observation because for people that like you got to be careful about saying that the cafeteria is bad. That are doing a cafeteria reno right now that are just finishing, that digital renderings are out there on the internet for you guys. Maybe
and they're doing a big renovation of the Pelicans practice facility too. Like the Pelicans practice facility is getting a ton of work too.
That meatloaf is going to be some kind of good, guys. But we're going to get up those player rankings on the cafeteria finally. It's just wild that it's hostile tactics to this degree, because you imagine this when you're seeing like corporations fighting against each other. Like that's when tactics like this are typically used. And it's probably due to like rate increases, desired by the LSED and the Saints saying, no, we don't want the rate increase to be that high. Like that's probably real. That's probably what it is. But it's interesting that this is the tactic that's chosen because it's messy. It's out in the open for people to observe. It will probably get attention from people like us and probably people bigger than us, because not a lot of that going on in professional leagues right now. So this is not that far off of like San Diego Chargers and things like that. Like this is in the breadth of those conversations. So yeah, it's just, like you said, it's not dire. I don't think it's going to stop a renovation from happening or anything like that. They've obviously already done a lot of the work.
Yeah, they're not coming up against this deadline. I mean, they've got years at Smoothie King Center under this extension. So
they'll get everything done. But anyway, yeah, moving on.
Let's shift gears. I've been thinking about a potential Brandon Ingram trade, and if the Pelicans end up doing this, what I think is necessary to get back, and just what I think is necessary to add to this roster in general next year. And one of the fears I have, if the Pelicans deal Brandon for, like, let's say they move him to Cleveland and they get back, Jared Allen, or God forbid, Evan Mobley, who's like an incredible, I mean, that's probably not happening, but move him and you are only getting like a center back and you do not address the guard position in any way, I would become very concerned by just the overall lack of creation that is on this Pelicans roster. I think sending out Brandon and not getting a creator who is a guard back, that makes you so dependent on Zion to be a creator. I think he's almost overtaxed. And then, in the event that Zion goes down, I would just be terrified by what would happen to the offense. We know what happened the season before this one that just concluded. He basically missed the final half of the year, and they were 26 in offense. And we just saw what happened in the playoffs. They never scored more than 92 points in any of those games. If I am sending Brandon out, or just in general, I want the Pelicans to go out and try to get a Darius Garland, go out and get a DeJounte Murray. I think Trae Young is at least like worth a discussion because he is such a talented guy. But that is my point. Yes, they're going to have to try to do something to address the center position. But if Brandon is going out, I feel like they have to do something at the guard spot too.
Yeah, like by the end of this summer, if Brandon's leaving in some way, regardless, like his trade plus whatever else moves in the summer, you have got to have an incursion of skill at the center spot and in initiation, creation, play generation via whatever means that needs to be. But I think if we're looking at like realistic trade pathways, there's a lot more that makes sense involving Brandon that involve guards than centers. And the ones that involve centers, like Jalen Duren, like we should probably just put Mobley off we shouldn't even talk about him anymore, if we're being honest. Like the way that series closed, the things that have been said about Jared Allen since then, and the like Donovan Mitchell, like hugging Mobley and telling him that's what you need to be and all that stuff. Like it's hard to not continue to invest in Mobley when you were not that invested in Allen. You have him on a good deal and people value him. Like he's going to be the one that goes. I think that has become a little transparent, almost as much as Bickerstaff leaving Cleveland, which finally happens today. Allen for BI is not enough. Like even just perception wise, that can't be it. Allen is a good center who's virtually at his ceiling. He's a great value for what he is and for what his contract is and for what you're going to get, but you also know what you're not going to get. And especially with like where the price tag has been on him historically, it's probably not that far off now. And like, he's not a creator. He's not a shooter. He's a lob threat rim protector who can rim run a little bit. He's good at those things, and he's gotten a lot better playing out of the pick and roll and out of the short roll. Yes, those things are true. His rebounding has picked up. That is true. You're losing 20 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds a game. And that is what BI has been his whole career. So when that goes away and you replace it with guy that doesn't have go-to offense, we better find a solution, especially the thing that we haven't hit on yet. Part of the hedged bet of having less creation and less guard play on this team thus far has been that when you acquired CJ, you're going to get a little bit of creation and play running and guard from him. We've seen the limits, and we've seen where the limits are today. The limits are farther along this year than where they were even a year ago.
A better player when he is playing off ball than on the ball.
Yeah, you just can't bet on that. You can't hedge that bet again. So if it is Allen for BI, I would tell you that means they missed on probably their first 4 or 5 options, and they still have to come up with a guard somewhere.
So let's say they do move Brandon and they get back a Darius Garland or a smaller guard who is a talented creator. And the Pelicans have CJ McCollum, who makes more than $30 million a year, and this new guy is going to be paid a lot and is talented. That leaves you with 3 options. Start CJ and small guard X together. Bring CJ off of the bench, which, to just tell you, like you've already heard those whispers this offseason of like, could CJ come off the bench next year? I have no idea. It's kind of one of those things where I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, he's a guy who had a great season. He's making more than $30 million a year, still in his early 30s. Or you could trade CJ. But those are the 3 options that you have. And I don't detect like a lot of willingness for the Pelicans to start 2 small guards together, right?
They've tried. They've tried and failed. Like during injury and stuff this past year, they've tried. They've done Jose next to him. They ran Hawkins next to CJ, and those backcourts never looked good. You basically would like need to pray that Dyson takes a giant step.
Yeah. So look, those are the guys I'm thinking about. I think if like the Pelicans were able to get back Darius Garland, I think that would be, a win for them. That would be really interesting. DeJounte Murray. I like DeJounte Murray, pretty good contract. I don't love him. Trae Young, I mean, my personal opinion is I'm to the point where I'm just like, he might be a guy worth betting on. And yes, there is risk involved, but Trae Young is a talent and he's generally pretty available. And when you just look at like the potential fit between Trae and Zion on the offensive end, that could be special. I mean, you could run the pick and roll either way. I mean, Zion, that would 100% be the best pick and roll guard that Zion ever played with, and a guy who could just feed him lobs and really stretch the floor out to 35 feet and take a bunch of pull-ups. So like that is intriguing to me for sure. I mean, I think all of those would be good, pretty good options.
Look, I feel like I'm going to go even stronger on the Trae Young thing. I'll do this from my buddy Tyler. Look, I have all the same concerns about Trae Young personality-wise, and from what I've seen from other players playing next to him in Atlanta, the way DeJounte Murray has talked about him since he's been in Atlanta, it's been an interesting ride there, and it seems like Atlanta is done, but Atlanta also still wants a very high price tag for him. This market's interesting. We are a big participant. The Lakers are a big participant in terms of aggression to get a guard. And then everything else is kind of weird. Like, we don't really know that Detroit is going to do anything crazy. We don't know. Miami wants to do stuff, but with what that anybody wants? Like Tyler Hero? And the Lakers are kind of bargain shoppers. They're using future picks way down the road, and hopefully you like D'Angelo Russell and like Rui Hachimura or Austin Reeves, and like that's the best thing. Like the Pelicans can top anything that they offer, but we're all waiting for Cleveland to decide what they're doing at their guard spot. And we're watching from there, because I think the way things read right now, if you're reading every single like rumor reporting that's out there from all the legitimate people, it feels very much like the Cavs and Mitchell are doing a dance right now about years and about whether or not it's a 1+1 or a 2+1 or a full 4.
Yeah,
Cleveland's
the people I
leaking.
talk to think Mitchell is extending and staying in Cleveland.
Yeah, Cleveland's leaking left and right that he's going to sign. And at the same time, all of the clutch sources are coming out fostering market for Garland. They're talking about teams wanting him, and like Minnesota's in on Garland. Okay, how? That's not reality. So it's going to be interesting, because what it looks like is like us and the Lakers are kind of staring down everybody. And I think we're all looking at Garland as like the reasonable high-end talent that's going to be available. And then after that, like Trae Young, like just to stack them up. If Trae Young says he wants to come to New Orleans, like just flatly, if he says he wants to come to New Orleans, if he tells us he likes gumbo, throw everything else out and send everything and pull the trigger. Because the number one concern I have is like, will you come to someone else's team and be you and use your skills and play next to this guy? You tell me you want to be here, I'm going to gaslight myself so fast. I'm going to give you a Nobel Peace Prize and tell everybody in Atlanta they were always wrong about you. Like, Trae is the most talented player, period, stop, done. He would be the best fit. It's just what can he do to make you feel good about paying the price tag? Darius, on the other hand, does not have any of that stuff attached to him. He is a recent former All-Star that looks like he was in a terrible fit situation, and that's how kind of everybody feels about it. There's not enough out there to say. It really feels like the Knicks are going to re-sign their guys. Paul George is going to go to the Sixers. And outside of that, the players are Atlanta and Cleveland as sellers. Cleveland also like partial buyer because they're looking to get something back for Garland. Detroit, we don't know yet because they're just hiring Trajan today. And they have like middling assets that people like kind of want but are unproven. LA, desperate buyers with a subpar package. So it kind of feels like if the Pelicans have conviction on any of this, they can make it happen. And if Trae Young's available for anything other than like a Rudy Gobert price, you should do it. You should. But if Garland's going to be available and you like him more for a little bit less or even the same and you just feel better because he's a more solid dude, you do it. And it does create a CJ conundrum. It creates a small backcourt with CJ. I think I go for the option. I think the option is between number 1 and 2. I think what they do is they start the year with CJ starting because they like don't want to do that to him and they let it ride out for a little bit. And then after it looks really bad and they get lit up defensively, then they do the CJ, we really need you to slide to the bench. And he does the veteran thing and he goes to the bench because he's a good dude.
Do you think Trae Young has any Kyrie-like potential just in terms of, hey, look, this guy is basically getting the reputation that you can't win with him, right? And Trae's issues are different than Kyrie's were in Boston and Brooklyn. But do you think there's any potential where Trae goes to a different team and he's just motivated to prove like, no, I'm not this guy you guys think I am, and I make a lot of sense next to Zion Williamson on offense, and the Pelicans have a lot of rangy, lengthy wings to plug in between us, and actually we're pretty good. Do you think there's any of that potential?
I mean, I think like I said, I think he's a perfect fit next to Zion for all the reasons that jump out at you, like the pick and roll stuff, the depth of shooting, the self-creation. His passing is great. The issue is heliocentricity from a guy who's 6 foot. Like that's the tough part. And also please shave your head and just come on home. Like let's give that up already. But the idea is like when Luka is the heliocentric player, he's 6'8" and he's got mass.
He's built like an SEC tight end.
Yes, he can do it everywhere. Trae's a skinny 6-footer that baits fouls and takes 30-foot shots and all that stuff. And like you can go watch the games. He'll dribble the ball for 20 seconds and everybody stands still around him. And it's not hard to imagine why guys wouldn't enjoy that. Like, there are guys that have played with Luka that have complained about it. So it's not hard to imagine why there's been friction. I think if there ever was going to be an environment for him to really like want to stick it to people, I think this market specifically is a pretty interesting place for that. You have him kind of, his people kind of talking about like, oh, you know, the Spurs, and the Spurs kind of putting it out there that they're not really looking at that. So it really sounds like he's fishing for a market. He just left Clutch, which makes LA seem like not super desirable. And his price tag's high. Like, of the places he could go, unless he tried to, like, I guess, force his way to Brooklyn, maybe, we are a place that like makes sense to like rejuvenate your image, be a second stop, and like kind of get your reputation back, because this dude was an all NBA player who is hated in Madison Square Garden for the rest of his life. That did happen. So yeah.
One of the layers of this, if it were to happen, Zion was, before the pre-draft lottery in 2019, there was a lot, said and written before and after that, hey, New York, Zion might have liked to end up in New York. But the other destination that people talked about was Atlanta. I think, kind of from what I've heard, that Zion would have been pretty fired up back in 2019 by a potential pairing with Trae Young and Atlanta. I think, as people kind of looked at that as like, yeah, this is a match that makes sense. So it would be kind of funny if that ended up happening, 5 years later. This is a huge summer for the Pelicans. I think the changes just kind of started with Trajan Langdon going up to Detroit. I think it's TBD if the Pelicans are going to lose their top assistant coach and James Borrego, who is in the mix in LA. Apparently has a good relationship with Anthony Davis. He's going to be in the mix for the Cleveland job that just opened up. I mean, I think this is potentially somewhere where you see change at all three levels, the front office level, the coaching level, and then the roster level. I think there's a really good chance where like significant change happens everywhere. And I think there's a chance that like the Pelicans basically number 2 at all three of those levels changes. I mean, Trajan Langdon just did. James Borrego, there's a chance, and Brandon Ingram, there's definitely a chance.
Feels kind of like we just like prepare ourselves mentally that Borrego's going to go. Like it at least feels that way. I'm just doing the fan thing of like, seems like he's kind of done here. But we'll see. But at the same time, before anybody like ties him to like greater conspiracies about where he's going to go, and that means that's where Brandon's going to go, James Borrego is a good candidate for jobs, and he's very available. He's going to be on the list for all of these teams. People respect him around the league. People liked it when we hired him for all of those reasons. He chose his own untimely end because he didn't like the direction of what was happening with Charlotte. And like people still like him a lot. Like he's in a very similar vein to like Kenny Atkinson with like a little less accomplishment. So
and how is Charlotte done, post Borrego? Like what is the state of the Charlotte Hornets right now?
Oh, I mean, man, most unserious franchise in the NBA.
Yeah. I mean, Brandon Miller, nice young player. I was definitely way too low on him last year. LaMelo Ball, very unserious guy.
Oh man. Yeah. Mark Williams is about the only thing over there that I'm intrigued by, and he ain't playing.
It was funny, like after Hornets games last year when Steve Clifford would just be like, yeah, here's why we stink, and like we're not going to be good this year. Like, let me just be real with you.
So MJ just told Cliff, like right out the gate, like, hey, I need you to come back and just take some bullets for me for a year, but I'll pay you real good. You gonna do that for me, buddy? Come on back.
Steve, the Kevlar vest Clifford.
Yeah, Steve, the meat shield Clifford. Yeah. So I have all NBA gripes, but we'll get to those another time. The third team rubs me raw a little bit, but I need more than a few minutes to get my gripes out.
All right. We will do Adam's grievances next week. I think we're going to talk a lot of draft next week. That's like kind of coming up here. We're about a month out. We really haven't talked about it that much. So we'll hit the draft hard next week, but there was just so much news this week that we felt like we had to hit. And Yeah, it's not boring around here. It's not boring, Adam.
It's always interesting. I won't say it's always fun, but it's always interesting.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll talk to you again soon.